Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a side-by-side comparison tutorial with a possible dupe for the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette. So I did show you guys this palette in my shop hush haul. This is the Beauty Creations Irresistible Palette. So the Anastasia palette is $42. The Beauty Creations palette is $15. So in the Anastasia palette you get 14 shades. In the Irresistible palette you get 15 shades. So you actually do get more eyeshadows in the cheaper one. I feel like this was kind of like the game changer and kind of like the trendsetter in like berry, pinky toned, maroon eyeshadow palettes. Now I'm gonna go ahead and say that the Irresistible palette does not have every single shade that the Modern Renaissance palette has. Not every single shade is duped. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys my full review over the Anastasia palette so you know where I stand with it. These shadows are very creamy, soft, buttery, opaque. They are pretty easy to work with. I think the formula is pretty hard to beat. Now I will say there are a couple of things that I don't like about this palette. For one, I feel like it's kind of missing some shades. So right here in this area of the palette, you have your red, berry toned eyeshadows, but there are only three. It's Red Ochre, Venetian Red, and Love Letter. And that's basically all the berry toned shadows you have in here. This shade right here, Antique Bronze, is the weirdest shadow I've ever seen. I can't even describe it. It's kind of like it's a bronze, but it has a little bit of like a plum aspect to it. It's just, I don't really like that shade. But the only shade that I really feel like fits in with the berry tones that define this palette is this shade right here, which is Blonde Fresco, and it's like a muted lavender. So the other issue that I have with this palette, and I don't know if I've voiced it before, but where these are so opaque, it's kind of like they cancel each other out. It kind of seems like the top shade counteracts and cancels out the bottom shade where they're so highly pigmented. I haven't really used the Irresistible palette a whole lot, so I really don't have a firm grasp on it, but I will say there is definitely a quality difference. There are some shades in here that I definitely feel like rival the Anastasia shadows as far as formula and quality goes. So I do want to point out, and I feel like this is kind of a thing that happens with cheaper quality eyeshadows, but in pretty much all the matte ones, like take a look at this one, this one, this one, this one, they kind of have that weird like oily, uneven texture. I've heard that the problem comes from oil, like when you touch it with your finger or you dip your brush into it after you've touched your eyelid, like the oil's on your eyelid. It seems like that's a pretty consistent problem. So now I'm gonna go ahead and insert the comparison swatches of the shadows in the Irresistible palette that I find are trying to dupe the shadows in the Anastasia palette. Very big rule of mine to not do my eyes after my face, but I had to do another video first, so we are breaking the rules today. I do apologize to myself. Another reason I want to point out that I don't do my eyes after my face is because when you try to go in with eye primer, it gets all cakey and it starts like gathering and bunching up, and it's an awful situation. Am I bleeding? I'm bleeding. Oh, no I'm not. What is that? So I'm gonna go ahead and set my eye primer on both eyes with the yellow skin tone colored eyeshadow in both palettes. So this is Golden Ochre in the Anastasia palette. This is one of my favorite shades in the palette as far as like setting my eye primer. It's just a matte yellowish bone color. This looks like it's trying to dupe Golden Ochre. So this one is definitely not as pigmented and soft, and a little bit does not go a long way like Golden Ochre does. And it kind of has this weird sheen to it. Is there a sheen in this? It looks like it's matte, but it also has like a satiny finish. So now I'm gonna go into Raw Sienna. So I believe this shade right here, which is called Bear, is trying to dupe Raw Sienna. Okay, so here is Raw Sienna from the Anastasia palette, and here is Bear from the Irresistible palette. So again, there's definitely a quality difference. They're pretty much the exact same shade, but as you can see, Bear is not as pigmented, it's not as intense, and it's definitely not as buttery. So again, here is Raw Sienna on the Anastasia side. There is a lot of like kick up and debris on both shadows, I will say that. So here is Bare. So they do look the exact same on both sides as far as the color and the finish goes. I am having to build up this shade on the Irresistible palette side a little bit more, but overall it's the same effect. Now I'm gonna go into Burnt Orange on the Anastasia palette. This is just another matte, kind of warm, orangey brown shade. We're basically just gonna put this in the outer V and kind of stream it along the socket. So I'm gonna go into this shade right here, which is called Infatuated. So here is Infatuated from the Irresistible palette, and here is Burnt Orange. They look literally identical. So yeah, Infatuated definitely does resemble the formulation and quality and shade and everything as the Anastasia shade does. So I will say, even though I'm having to build up the shadows from the Beauty Creations palette, I don't really hate that. Sometimes it takes me longer to try to blend away excess pigmentation than it does to build up. Right now, we're looking the exact same on both sides. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into Buon Fresco. I'm gonna take that and just put this right on top of those shades, really. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but another thing I don't like about the Anastasia shadows is that when I first start blending it, the shadow just starts flying around. I can see it passing my eyeball. Here's the thing, I just don't feel like this shade, this purpley shade, goes with these warm shades. I just feel like, I mean, it's good to have a mix of cool and warm tones in a palette just so you have variety, but I don't feel like these really work together that well. So just because I don't really like the way this is looking, I'm just gonna bring this up a little bit higher and kind of cover up everything I just did. So here's Only Yours from the Beauty Creations palette. Here's Buon Fresco from Anastasia. As you can see, these are not all that similar. I mean, I guess they kind of have a similar taupey undertone, but Only Yours from the Beauty Creations palette is a lot more gray based. This one is definitely not pigmented. I'm gonna have to build this one up a whole lot because I'm not even seeing it. Where are you? Look at this. What? It lacks so much pigmentation. I've tried to build it up so many times. I've dipped my brush in there probably about 9 to 10 times. Yeah, we're gonna stop here because I'm not gonna force it. So I'm gonna go in with Antique Bronze. So this one's more of a shimmery satin. It's not even really showing up a whole lot. This is probably the worst shade in the palette. So the shade I'm gonna go in with in the Beauty Creations palette is this one right here, which is called Till Midnight. I actually think this one is prettier. This one is so much better. It is extremely pigmented and creamy. I think this palette and this brand probably does shimmery shades better than anything. And as you can see, Antique Bronze is just so much more dull and lackluster. Till Midnight actually has a really pretty shimmery metallic finish. It's more intense, it's more pigmented, and it's just so much more flattering. Okay, so now I'm gonna start working with the berry red tones in both palettes. So first I'm gonna go in with Red Ochre in the Anastasia palette. This is definitely one of my favorite shadows, but I would describe this as a deep brick red. Like I said, we're gonna be covering up pretty much everything we do with other shadows, just because I'm trying to show you guys a lot in action. Now, I don't know if you guys can see that, but like I was saying earlier, it just seems like it covers up everything underneath where it's so opaque. These Anastasia shadows do have a lot of fallout. Definitely do your eyes first. The only possible shade in the Beauty Creations palette that I could see being a dupe for Red Ochre is this one right here, which is called Tender Kiss. This one has more of an orange undertone, whereas Red Ochre is more of a deep red. I'm definitely not having as hard of a time with this as I did with that purpley shade I tried. This one's going on a little bit more pigmented, but I'm still having to build it up quite a bit. It's not as matte as Red Ochre. It's another one of those matte shades that it looks matte, but it actually has a satin finish when you put it on your eyes. Okay, so there's what we've got going on so far. So there's one shade in this Beauty Creations palette that I think it's actually pretty unique, and it's not in the Anastasia palette, and that is this shade right here, which is called Smack. And this is a mid-toned, kind of deeper pink salmony color, and I feel like that kind of shade is what should have been in the Anastasia palette, because I think that would be a really pretty crease transition shade with those berry red tones. So I think they're trying to dupe Smack with Venetian red in the Anastasia palette. They're not similar at all, but I think that's what they're actually trying to do. So here is Smack from the Beauty Creations palette. Here's Venetian red. Because I know that they're not similar at all, I'm not gonna try to do Smack on one side, Venetian red on the other. I'm just gonna go ahead and put Smack all in the crease on both sides just to make a match. It's not the most pigmented, it's not the best quality. It's kind of like the other matte shadows in the palette, but I just really like the shade and I just want it to work really bad. Moving on to Love Letter. Again, one of the pretty shades in the palette. I'm gonna go ahead and put that. Let's put it in the socket. So I will say the one thing I feel like this Anastasia palette has is that they're consistent. So now I'm gonna go in with this shade right here in the Beauty Creations palette called Kiss Me. This one does look pretty similar. So here is Kiss Me from the Beauty Creations palette. Here's Love Letter. Definitely a pigmentation and quality difference. As you can see, Love Letter is a lot more smooth. So this one definitely isn't as pigmented right off the bat. I am having to build it up, but it's building up better than some of the other matte shadows I just used. So these are looking actually very, very similar. That's actually not a bad shade from the Beauty Creations palette. The only difference I see is that Love Letter is a little bit deeper. That's another thing with the Anastasia shadows, that where they are so pigmented, they do translate darker when you build them up. So now I'm gonna move on to Primavera in the Anastasia palette. This is the most beautiful shimmery metallic, like champagne gold. It's got more of a yellow undertone. And when you wet your brush and use this, oh. So now I'm gonna go into this one right here in the Beauty Creations palette, which is called Love Letter, ironically enough. This one is dead on. And actually the formulation of the Beauty Creations shade is a little bit better than Primavera in my opinion. It's actually more intense. So which one's which? So here is Primavera from the Anastasia palette, and here's Love Letter from the Beauty Creations palette. They swatch the same, they have the same finish, the same like metallic reflectiveness. Perfect dupes right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the pinky shimmery shade in the Anastasia palette just to show you guys. So this is called Vermeer, which is a very pretty shimmery icy pink. This one's called True Love. Again, gets it dead on. So I'm just gonna put this right on top of Primavera. Hey, you guys can't complain because you're getting to see pretty much every shadow in action. Then True Love. This one actually is a little bit easier to build up. It is more metallic and shiny. For the lower lash line, I'm gonna use the browns in the palette because I just wanna show you guys something different. So I'm gonna go in with Cypress Umber, which is just a really matte, deep, dark chocolate brown. So I'm not really the biggest fan of this shade just because it's so pigmented that when I put it on like my eyelid, it kind of cancels out everything I did. So I usually try not to use this shade at all, really. This shade right here looks like it's trying to dupe. It's called Yours. So even though they're not really similar, this might be the kind of formula I would rather have on my upper eyelid, where it's not so intensely pigmented. So now for my brow bone, I'm gonna go in and mix Golden Ochre and Tempera. Tempera is another matte shade. It's got like a bone colored ivory. I have to make sure that I get more Golden Ochre in that because it's so pigmented that it kind of makes it look too white on its own. Here is Tempera from the Anastasia palette, and here is Naked. So they are pretty similar as far as the tone goes. So yeah, that one worked, but I don't know about it. So here's what we've come up with. So I definitely think they look a lot more similar than what I thought they would. They actually look like I use the same products on both sides. But I can't say that this palette as a whole is an exact dupe for the Anastasia palette. The shimmery shadows as a whole are absolutely amazing. I definitely think they're very, very high quality, and they're definitely a winning point for this palette, but the matte shades are just not pigmented enough for me. And a lot of the ones that look matte kind of have a sheen to them. So because there are so many hits and misses in this palette, I just don't know if I can fully recommend it. But I will say, if you're on a budget, if you can't afford the Anastasia palette and want a similar effect, this is definitely something worth checking out, even though there are hits and misses and it's not as high quality. So if you do decide to pick up this palette or anything from shophush.com, I do have a coupon code. It's Glamour Index. I will put it right here and also in the description box. I don't get commission or anything off of it. It's just 10% off for you guys. But I will say I did see a palette on shophush.com that it looked to be newer. I didn't see it when I made my last purchase. That looks to be exactly the same as the Anastasia palette. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video nonetheless. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. Thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe, follow me on all my social media. All the links are below. And I hope you guys have a beautiful day. Mwah.